So a couple weeks ago, we started this conversation called "Go Fish," and it all revolved around a statement that Jesus made to some of his first disciples as he called them, invited them to follow him. Put it on the screen. In Matthew 4, he made this statement. He said, "And he said to them, 'Follow me, and I will make you,' say it with me, 'fishers of men.'" Right, fishers of men. He said, "If you follow me, I'm going to do something that hasn't been done. I'm going to make you into something you're not already," which is a little strange. It might have felt a little weird to them because they were already fishermen, those initial disciples, but he said, "I want to do something more." And so we've been diving into that statement and realizing that when he invited us to follow him and to fish, it was way more than just catching people, capturing people against their will, right? We tend to think of fishing as a rod and a reel, a hook. You catch a fish, the fish does not really want to be caught. You trick the fish some way with lure or bait to jump onto that hook, and then you fight him out of the water. That's not what fishing is when it comes to fishing for Jesus. That's not what he meant. He meant, I'm going to take you and I'm going to do something with you. I'm going to make you into a fisher of people. I'm going to help you through the Spirit. Use your skills, use your abilities, use your experiences, and you're going to share my gospel, my good news with everybody. So we said, bottom line, to follow Jesus, to follow is to fish. To follow is to fish. It has to happen that way. The act of surrendering our lives so that we can connect more and more with Jesus, and then our abilities, our talents, our skills, everything gets refocused for his purposes, and that includes having conversations about who Jesus is. I came across a video this week about one of our members in kind of how he fishes in his world. Now, this is going to be a video that revolves around our drummer's his job, Gary. But I want to show this to you real quick, and I'll make a couple of comments. Dim the lights and show this video to everybody.
Global Heart Ministries exists to reach people and to connect them into a healthy Christian community in some of the most hard-to-reach, oppressed regions of the world, Central Asia and the Middle East. In order to reach the hearts of people in various languages and cultures across this region, Global Heart has developed specific culturally sensitive programs and online outreach platforms hosted by people from these very same areas who understand the challenges of presenting the gospel to their own people in a relevant way. Our exciting wild animal programs are designed to present biblical truths about God and creation while drawing them to entertaining and educational content. Our women's talk show programs celebrate the art, music, and cultures of Central Asia by showcasing some of their country's national performers. Our indigenous hosts have many years of biblical training, and they offer real hope and answers. These conversational programs are designed to touch the cultural heart and build a bridge to the spiritual soul. Men's testimony cooking programs feature powerful stories of how God has transformed the lives of former Muslim men while sharing enticing meals they cook together. We are hearing great stories from men who are drawn to Jesus through these testimonies. And here is what sets Global Heart Ministries apart. Global Heart Ministries is employing frontline digital strategy and online evangelists to reach and connect people in our focus countries to healthy Christian communities on the ground. Using satellite broadcasting, websites, digital advertising, social media, and mobile apps, we can reach people who are searching online for answers about God and connect them to hidden communities of believers. This is the first of its kind online outreach that leads to a safe connection on the ground with strong believers in this region of the world. Global Heart has prayed for this for years, as have the people on the ground who are seeking a way to not only reach their neighbors, but also bring them into a real fellowship with a thriving local hidden church. We invite you to join us on this adventure of faith. Doing more to fulfill the Great Commission is finally at our fingertips. Together with your partnership, we can engage people who may never hear the gospel any other way. And can you imagine? They are then invited in to have fellowship with other believers in their hometown.
I thought that was a great video. Gary, if you missed him, he was in that clip for just a second, but he actually puts these videos together. That's what he does for a living. He edits video. And Gary has a way that he's taken his skills, and God's been able to use him to reach others, to fish in a very unusual way. One of the things I love about that video, though, because I can imagine some of us are sitting there going, wait a minute, I'm like an accountant, or I sit at a cubicle, or I'm in the tech industry. It doesn't really apply. What we saw on the screen doesn't really apply to me the same way. It doesn't have to. We're going to talk more about this, but you can use your skills in all kinds of ways to fish. And this is just one. I thought it was, not only is this a great company, but it's a great thing the way Gary has employed his skills, and he's fishing for Christ all the time. As we get into this, though, I want to talk more about why we said that kind of fishing is important. Because you remember a couple of weeks ago we said, look, it can seem really intrusive, and sometimes I don't want to share with others. And the problem is, for most of us, if we think about sharing our faith, there's something in us that says, well, if I'm doing this, it's because I'm better, or I have a better system, or I'm more moral, or we make a better effort as Christians. That's why we share our faith, and that's not it at all, right? Remember we said 2 weeks ago that we don't have a better system, we have a Savior. And I love how in that video you got to see just a little bit about how they can use an online presence to then begin to talk about the Savior, introduce them, and then eventually have relationship together. Because it takes a relationship, right? We fish because we met a person, not because we've all enrolled in some new program. And that message is just not intuitive. So I'm going to keep saying this to you. People have to have somebody introduce Jesus to them in some way. You don't just go sit under an apple tree somewhere. Do we have apple trees up here? I don't know where that came from. You don't just go sit under an apple tree and have some moment where Jesus just all of a sudden is there, right? Most of us have to be introduced to Jesus, and it takes a person in your life introducing you, revealing a historical, very real person who walked this earth, was crucified, and was resurrected. And we need to introduce him to other people. Jesus calls us to fish, but a lot of times we shrink back, right? We get afraid. And so last week we defined something there. We talked about boldness, and I told you, boldness is not necessarily what I do. All right, this is easy for me because nobody's throwing things at me. The most you're going to do is send me an email this week and tell me where I messed up, and that's okay. But for the most part, standing here in front of you is not a hard thing, right? So this is not bold. Boldness, we define it this way, is this Spirit-empowered conviction. The Spirit-empowered conviction, not something you muster up yourself. Spirit-empowered conviction in the face of earthly threats. Remember we talked about how the disciples, they went from these really feeble guys who just were dropping the ball all over the place to these really bold ambassadors for Christ because they started to focus on the person, right? It was a Spirit-empowered conviction. And then the threats they faced, they realized God could use anything, any wrong that was done against them, he could use it for his glory, even though that's not what any of us really want, right? Nobody wants bad things to happen. So as we've been talking, now let's talk this week about something new. Because as we've been talking, it kind of feels like, if you're tracking with me, that fishing, right, evangelizing, is a bit of a solo act. It almost feels like I'm asking you to go out by yourself somewhere and just start knocking on doors. And I think that's a bit of a misunderstanding. I've got a couple of friends, and maybe you have these kind of friends. I've got a guy in my life that when he gets on an airplane, in fact, if you've been on an airplane with him, you would know it right now. Like when you get on an airplane, you're going to get off the airplane. You're either going to know more about Jesus, you're going to have trusted Jesus for the first time, or you're going to be running from Jesus, right? I mean, but you're going to talk about Jesus in some way. And the funny thing is it's not forceful. He doesn't force anything. It's just a gift with him. He's a natural evangelist. He talks about Jesus. It just kind of oozes out of him. And God uses him that way. But we're all supposed to fish, right? That's what I said a couple weeks ago. To follow is to fish, right? That evangelism is really just our practice of our faith in Christ. So how do we do that? Is this fishing mandate just for me to go out and kind of solo it, Lone Ranger it all the time? Or is there more that can happen there? I want to talk about a passage this morning where Jesus is with his disciples. If you know anything about Israel, you know that its history, going back 2,000 years before Jesus, is really muddy. When I say muddy, it's full of turmoil. It's full of some bad things. Some bad things have happened. Put the map up of Israel. If you've never paid attention, if you look at this map, see, I just drew an arrow where Israel is. It's just a spot compared to the rest of the world. It's a little nation. But they're always getting invaded. They're always getting turned into slaves. They're always being persecuted at different times. And look, I'm not going to defend today any bad actions. I'm just saying they've got a history of this. This is what's happened to them over the years. And so as this has been happening, they would talk about this coming Messiah. The whole nation of Israel was waiting for this Messiah, and he was very real in their head, because if you can imagine, when Jesus showed up, Rome was in control of most of the known world, and Rome kind of pushed everybody down, kind of took their culture away, kind of tried to blend their culture in, and Israel didn't like that. So Israel's looking for this deliverer. They're looking for a Messiah. They're looking for somebody to come in and set them up again as a nation, a safe place to follow God. Jesus is talking to his disciples, but before that, he has a conversation with some of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, and he's trying to convince them that they're missing something. And then he goes away with the disciples, and he starts trying to talk to the disciples about what just happened with the Pharisees. Read what he says in Matthew 16, verse 12. He's saying, Jesus now is talking to the disciples about the Pharisees being leaven. He's using this metaphor of them being yeast, okay? And watch what he says, or what they understand in verse 12. They, the disciples, understood that he, Jesus, did not tell them to beware of the leaven of bread, but of the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. All of a sudden, here's what's happening. There's starting to become a real awareness that Jesus is talking about something that they're missing, that the teachers of the law, the Pharisees, have missed something. And Jesus is now warning his disciples, hey, there's a leaven in this teaching, that they're wrong. They're missing something. And the disciples are going, oh, okay, we're starting to get it now. He's not talking about bread. He's trying to tell us that there's something that we're missing when it comes to the teaching of the Messiah, the deliverer, the anointed one. Now let's pick it back up in verse 13. When Jesus came into the district of Caesarea of Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say that I am? Simple question. What's the word on the street? Who do people say that I am? What is the grapevine telling you? What's my identity? Who are people associating me with? What are they thinking? Verse 14. Somebody spoke up and said, they said, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. I want you to notice what they just did. They spoke up and they said, well, they really think you're from God. They think your message must be from God. They think you must speak for God in some way. In fact, so much so, now watch this, they didn't connect him to the idea of Messiah. They connected him to past prophets. They connected him to people who were teaching from the past. They connected him to people that, listen, for him to be one of those people, he'd have to be reincarnated, which was a big belief system in their day. They went backwards with his understanding. They didn't go forwards with him. Word on the street is, yeah, we think you're godly. We think that you teach the right things. We think you speak for God. We think you're important and powerful, but we're unsure about who you really are. We've got a list of guys you could be, but nobody's looking forward. Now Jesus does the natural next thing. Watch what he says, verse 15. So he says to them, but who do you say that I am? In my head, this is like an epic scene in a movie. This is the turning point in history for me in some ways. But who do you, because now the truth is going to start coming out, right? Okay, the word on the street says, yeah, you're godly. Yeah, you can be associated with these other godly prophets. But who do you disciples say that I am? Who do you followers of me say that I am? You see, if you're a disciple, if you're a follower of Jesus, really the bar has been set higher, right? Your understanding, your knowing of that person must be different. Your relationship should be different. He's expecting more out of them. They're walking with him. They're part of his inner circle. Who do you say that I am? Now remember, these are not the most educated men. And I'm not saying they're dumb. Okay, they're not. It's not that they're dumb. They just had never gone to school to study all of this stuff. They had not studied all the prophets, all the Old Testament verses. If I had a theological question, these are not the guys I go to for this answer, right? And Jesus is asking one of the most profound questions in history. Who do you say I am? Notice, look, he didn't say, who wrote the Bible? He didn't say that. He doesn't say, do you understand all the weird language in Ezekiel? Like the wheel and the stuff and the thing. And he didn't say that. He didn't say, explain to me all the deep truths about God. He simply asked, who do you say that I am? Sometimes we get so caught up in some of these other questions that we miss the real question, right? I call them distractions. We get distracted. There's a lot of distractions in our culture today. Have you heard these? Have you been a part of these? Maybe this has been a part of your world. How can I be a part of a church? How can I believe in a God when so many of his followers are hypocrites, right? When they argue so much, when they lie, when they cheat each other, when they stab each other in the back, when they're so cruel so many times during the week. It's not that those aren't serious questions. Those are serious questions. But those are distraction questions. You understand? Are you following me? That's a distraction question. The main question is, who do you say that I am? Who are you wrestling with here? Do you understand who I am in your life? Who I can be? Those other questions, not that they're not important, not that we don't need to struggle with, not that the church, listen, not that we don't need to be better and be less hypocritical, but the main question is always going to be, who do you say that I am? The most important question in history. Verse 16. Simon Peter replied. Watch this. Simon Peter, always the guy to jump in, answer first. He's quick to draw a lot of times, and usually he's wrong. Says, you are the Christ. New word. Not Jesus' last name. You're the Christ, the Son of the living God. He used that word Christ, Christos. He says, you're the anointed one. You're the Messiah. You're the one that literally has been set apart, declared for a certain moment in history, for a certain act. I laughed this week as I was thinking, do you have anybody that comes to mind that you know of, maybe in your lifetime or maybe you've read about, who has ever stood up in history and said, I'm God? Do you know a couple people? I mean, a couple come to mind real quick for me. I mean, there was one in Waco not a few years back, right? Somebody who said, I'm God. I'm God. And then they gather these people around them and they try to get followers and they try to build a whole following. Jesus looked at his followers first and he said, who do you say that I am? Notice that. He says, who do you say that I am? And Peter says, you're that Messiah. You're that long-awaited Messiah, the anointed one who's supposed to come, the deliverer. You're the one we've been waiting for, verse 17. And Jesus answers him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah. If you've never paid attention to that, Bar is not his middle name. It's Hebrew for son of. Simon, son of Jonah. Blessed are you. Because flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. He's saying, you didn't get this all on your own. Right, first of all, you didn't even go to the right schools. You weren't studying the scriptures like this, so I wouldn't anticipate you to know all of this stuff. But Jesus says, beyond that, you're paying attention, you're talking to me, we're interacting, and you're hearing God. And I tell you, verse 18, watch this. You are Peter. Petros. You're this rock. Petros is a rock that you can hold in your hand. It's like a pebble, it's a stone. You're this rock. And watch what he says. And on this rock, now he uses a different word, Petra, on this boulder. What is the boulder? This statement you just made that I am the Messiah. On this boulder, I'm now going to build my church. Peter, yeah, you're a rock. You're right. But the statement, the boulder, the anchor in this whole thing is what you just declared. That I am the Messiah. He says, I'm going to build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against him. Simon, you got this knowledge, but it didn't come from your schooling. It didn't come from you just being intelligent. God has spoken to you and revealed something to you, and you declared it. And now listen to me. On that statement alone, I'm going to build a church. I'm going to build an ecclesia. When Jesus used that word church, they had no connection to the word church that we have today. You understand that? They would have never thought of something like this, a religious thing. Right? When church, ecclesia was a term that was used for a gathering of a town. The normal ecclesia was for a town to get together when they needed to cast a vote. So it was a meeting. It was a town meeting. Jesus takes that word for town meeting. He says, I'm going to build a new meeting. I'm going to build a new gathering, a new church, a new ecclesia on one declaration. Watch this. On the declaration that I am the Messiah. He created something new. And it wasn't on political parties. It wasn't on denominations. Yes, we have a bunch of denominations, but they're built off of one thing. What? That Jesus is the Messiah. It wasn't built off of our ethnicity. It wasn't built off of language or hobbies or our interests or any other kind of platforms. It was built off of, I put in my notes, this is really funny because I have these weird thoughts. It wasn't built off of this well-known phrase by the Beatles that all we need is love, right? Yeah, if you're a certain generation, you get that maybe more than others. But it wasn't built off of some declaration, some new declaration of how this group's going to be better than this group. He says there is one platform, one thing that you'll believe in. One thing, one boulder, one declaration that I am the Son of God, the anticipated Messiah. And look, can I tell you something? Watch this. 2,000 years later, why are we here? 2,000 years later, we're still here talking about Jesus as the Messiah. It's the one thing that binds us all together. It's the one thing that unites us, right? And no local church is perfect, right? Can I get an amen on that one? Okay, yeah, I don't know. We're not really an amen in church a lot of times, but can I get, I'm just going to throw it out there. We're not perfect. I'm not perfect. But the truth that unifies us, the thing that keeps us all together, is this declaration that Jesus made, I am the Messiah. To fish is to follow. To fish is to follow. And to fish is to build an ecclesia, to build a church. Jesus says, come follow me, I'm going to make you fishers of men. And oh, by the way, follow me, we're going to build a church. And here it is, the gates of hell won't prevail against it. Fish is to follow Jesus. But the one thing that unites us all is he's the Messiah. You ever see that movie City Slickers? Anybody? Is that too old for everybody? The movie City Slickers. I like some movies like that. And Jack Palance is in there. Of course, he plays this really rugged old cowboy. And there's a famous scene. If you haven't seen it, Google it later. It's a lot of fun on YouTube. These city slickers, these three guys from the city, are going out to hang with Jack Palance in the country. And they're going to try to become, real cowboys overnight, which is impossible. And Palance is sitting around the fire with them one night. And I think everybody's trying to probably, speculate about life and figure things out. And so Jack Palance's character finally says, do you know what the secret to life is? Have you seen this part? And they're all kind of going, what is it? What is it? Anxious. Hey, he's going to tell us some big thing, right? And so Jack kind of holds up his finger like this. And to which one of them responds and says, your finger is the secret to life? And he says, one thing. You just got to know one thing. You stick with that, and the rest doesn't mean anything. He uses a different word for anything, but I edited it. You stick to the one thing, and the rest doesn't mean anything. And somebody finally says, but what's the one thing? And he says, that's what you have to figure out. The disciples figured it out. That's what they were figuring out. They were in the process, but that's what they figured out. The one thing is that Jesus is the Messiah. He's the anointed one. He's the one that from history past God has been pointing us towards, that he would come and deliver us through his sacrificial act. He is the Messiah. We are fish. And now we're called to fish. We're called to make ecclesia, the church. And it's a partnership that we have together. And I've been asking you last week, I said, hey, here's part of your homework. Start praying for boldness, right? Because the disciples would get in these situations where people would want to kill them. And instead of saying, hey, Father, take care of all these people wanting to kill us, they would say, hey, they're wanting to kill us. And oh, by the way, could you make us really bold in how we speak? We want to be bold. And I said, start praying for boldness, right? But the boldness is not built on us. It's built on one thing. Jesus is the Messiah. Listen, Journey, the church is your partner in the fishing process. We're in this thing together. That's why we build this like we do. Right? We're built for fishing. Watch, we're built for fishing. We're not built to store fish. That's not what we're supposed to do. We're not supposed to be like a fish market. We just put everything together and we just kind of keep fish and store fish. We're built to continually fish. I always say people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. The ecclesia was created for people to know how much God cares. That's why we exist. That's why we're not built on personal preferences. Can you imagine churches being built on personal preferences? There's a great church out in California. I won't tell you the name. I visited a few years back, and they were in a warehouse space much like us, except they had warehouse bay doors, the big kind that would roll up. And they had about 15 bay doors. So they just took the whole building and kind of divided it up. And each bay door was a different worship style, different music style. So you go in one, it'd be like country and western worship. You go in another, it'd be like hip-hop worship. You go in another, it'd be heavy metal worship. It was like 16 different worship styles on that campus. Now, we don't have the ability to do that. Not sure I would do it if we could. But that's what they did. But you still have to come back to the thing that unifies all of us, that Jesus is the Messiah. Not my language. That's not what sets me apart. Not the nation I come from. We have to be unified around the person of Jesus Christ, even though, listen, we're not uniform in our politics, our parenting styles, or our hairstyles. All right? Can we go there? All right. Just seeing if you're catching on with me. If you're new, my hair was short a few months ago. It's not short right now. Ever since Peter's declaration, this living body has come into existence, right? And it's to benefit more people. It's why we're here. That's why we strive. That's why I work so hard that we have a come and see mentality. If you haven't seen it before, go back to John 1 this week. Andrew brought Peter. Philip went out and brought his brother Nathaniel to Jesus. Zacchaeus, anybody remember Zacchaeus from that old story? He comes down from a tree. You know what he does? He gets all of his friends at his house and brings all of his friends and then brings Jesus in to introduce his friends to Jesus at a big party. Just brought him along. Woman at the well. Jesus confronts her, even talks to her about the things she's messing up in her life. But she learns so much that she goes out, she goes to the town and she tells everybody, hey, come back and see this person that I've met. It's a partnership journey. We're committed to unity of the faith, not uniformity of how we all look. Knowing this one thing, though, that Jesus is the Messiah. Listen, watch. If you know this one thing, then the next question is, who is your one? Know this one thing, and then ask yourself, who is your one? Right? We want to do what it takes to reach unbelievers, but it has to start somewhere. It has to start with your one. That's why we're praying for boldness. That's why we're praying for God to lead us in our conversations as we fish. What would happen? What would happen, Journey, if that was your prayer? What happens if you start not, listen, I pray this, I pray it for you, I want you to pray it. If you pray for boldness, what happens? If you pray for the one, what happens? If in 1 year you bring one to faith. That's why we partner together. Who's your one? Who is your one? A few years ago, Don Wicks, family of the church, he got me into saltwater tank hobby. Some of you have seen a little saltwater tank. He graciously got me involved. It's so much fun. I love it. Yeah, there's a little picture. I threw up this picture because I love my little starfish that he shows up about, Don knows this, about like every 10 days. He comes out of the sand and you see him for an hour, and then he's gone. And you think, I don't know if he died. Where is he? The thing about a saltwater tank is there are at least 9 different parameters that you've got to monitor on a weekly basis, daily basis. You got to monitor the calcium, right? The nitrates, the nitrites, the phosphate. You got to monitor the salinity, the temperature. There's all these things, and somebody was asking me about it one time. They said, it seems like it's a lot of work. It seems like you've got to monitor these things for such a small tank. Does the same thing happen in the ocean? And I said, well, the thing about the ocean is it's not a closed system, right? It's not a closed system, so it can heal itself better. But this little tank is built for X number of fish. Quite honestly, there's only X number of fish I can put in this tank. And there's a formula to figure that out, because if you overload the tank, it'll die. It won't last. We build tanks like this so that we can have fun. We can see the coral, see the fish, enjoy them in our homes. But it takes a lot of effort to maintain that tank for just a few fish. Journey, we are not like a fish tank. We weren't created to be maintained for a few fish. We were created to be fishers of people. I put something in your worship flyer this week, a little orange invite card. This is part of how we're trying to partner with you, and I know you've seen it, but I'm going to keep bringing it up because it's a great little card. Listen to me. It's not preachy. It doesn't tell people their lives are all screwed up. It's just a way for you to take, and in the times when you get into conversations, you can say, you know what? Why don't you come with me next time? Why don't you come see? Why don't you come hear what we talk about, the things I'm learning? We want to partner with you. So take that, carry it with you. Pray for boldness this week, and ask God to reveal who is your one. And then let's begin to ask more questions about what that means next week. Pray with me.